Should you be tracking your training by time or mileage? It's an age-old question. Should you run for 60 minutes or 10 miles? Does it even matter? What do elites do? What does the science say? And why does every training plan seem to pick one or the other without explaining why? I'm going to try to today to settle that debate of time versus mileage once and for all. I'm going to try and show you some of the physiological and the psychological differences between each approach and really explain to you which one to use and give you a framework for building your training blocks that actually make sense for your goals, your life, and your brain. I want to try and fix some of the confusion, give you some confidence in how you structure your training, and hopefully help you stop guessing on the runs you do and how you do them. For those of you who haven't followed along yet, I'm Brant Stachel. I'm a former national team running coach, mental performance coach, and registered psychotherapist. Over the last 15 years, I've coached everyone from first-time marathoners to Olympic hopefuls in the marathon 2:12 all the way up to 6 hours, and I've tried to help athletes break through that physical and mental plateaus using evidence-based training and mindset strategies. I've guided over 150 athletes to Boston qualification. I've coached more than 1,500 runners and over 24 athletes who represent Canada internationally. So like any good argument, let's define our terms here first. So time-based training means you're tracking your runs by duration. So you get out and run for 45 minutes or 90 minutes. You don't really care how far you went. The stimulus is about time on your feet. Whereas mileage-based training means you're tracking by distance. You go out to run 6 miles or 15 miles or 8 miles. You don't care how long it takes. The stimulus is about covering the distance. And so here's where I think it gets interesting. The two approaches can lead to very different training stresses, even when they seem equivalent on paper. A 60-minute run and a 8-mile run might sound like the same thing if you normally run 8-minute miles, let's say. But what happens when you're tired or it's hot or you're running hills? That 60-minute run might be 6 miles, 7 miles, 8 miles, 9 miles. But if you're committing to running 10 miles, you're going to be out there for 70, 75 minutes. That's a different stimulus completely. That's more stress. And that's at the core really of this entire debate, I think. Time and mileage create different psychological pressures and physiological demands depending on the context. So as always, there seems to be two camps to every argument. I want to, be fair and talk to both. And I think this should just be a neutral training decision. Sometimes you do stuff by, mileage or distance. Sometimes you do stuff by time. But let's break it down a little bit. The philosophy of the first camp, the mileage camp. So this is a little bit more of a traditionalist type approach, especially in North American, in particular, running culture. So you build your base by running X miles a week. You have a 12-week marathon plan that peaks at 50 miles a week, just putting our number, maybe 70 miles a week. And so you're tracking your weekly mileage, your monthly mileage, your yearly mileage. The logic here is that mileage is objective and measurable. And so if you run 40 miles a week this week, 45 miles the next week, you've increased your training load by a quantifiable amount. Fair enough. It's easy to check. It's easy to compare. Elite athletes, we often look at their Strava or hear what they talk about and they say, I'm running 90 miles a week, or I peaked at 140 miles a week in this marathon build. It's the language of the sport at the highest level. And there's a physiological logic too. Your body adapts to the total distance you cover. More miles generally mean more adaptation, more aerobic development, more musculoskeletal strengthening, and so on, but up to a point. The second camp, their philosophy, the time camp, would be an approach that's gained a little bit more traction, I would say, recently, especially in European and East African training systems. And so instead of saying I run 70 miles a week, you say I run 10 hours a week. And so you see triathletes and cyclists do this a lot too. They talk about their hours of training per week. And so the logic here is that the time on feet is what creates the training stimulus. So an easy 90-minute run creates a certain physiological response. And it doesn't matter if you've covered 10 miles or 12 miles during that time. The effort and the duration are what matter. And so this approach tends to account for terrain, conditions, and fatigue a little bit more naturally and ingrained in the idea. And so if you're running in the heat or in hills, you're going to be slower, but you still get the training effect from being out there for 90 minutes. From a psychological perspective, time-based training can feel less pressured. You don't have to hit a certain pace to complete your workout. You just have to be out there for the prescribed time. My take, as I kind of alluded to, it's contextually dependent. And I know that's an annoying answer and everybody hates hearing it depends, but it's true. Both approaches have merit, and I use both with athletes depending on their personality, their goals, and where they're at in training. But I will say this. I think the mileage obsession in running, especially recreational running, causes more problems than it solves, and I'll try to explain why in this video. If you pressured me to pick one, I would pick time every time, and the pun intended, I suppose. But the reason why I do that is because I think that the body recognizes time, not mileage. I think we account for far more of the physiological stressors and adaptations when we go by time. And so the example I use all the time when I'm talking to athletes is if I look at somebody like Thomas Nobbs, who we've done the marathon series with, he runs 100 miles a week. That might take him 2.5 to 3 hours less to run that 100 miles than it would take take you. That's the difference of adding a 3-hour long run to your week or spreading up those 3 hours across 7 days. That is a completely different week for you than it is for him. And so the stimulus and the recovery is completely different. But if I have him training for 14 hours and you training for 14 hours, that's a much more concrete stimulus. At the end of the day, the body, in my belief and what I've seen in the science, responds to time, not distance. As promised, let's break down some of the psychological differences. So the mileage trap, I find, gives a little bit of a pace pressure. So when you set out to run 10 miles, there's an implicit pressure to run at a certain pace. Because if you run too slow, that 10 miles is going to take forever. You're going to be out there for an hour and 45 minutes instead of an hour and 30 minutes. And so what I see happens, especially with self-coached athletes or highly competitive people, is they push the pace on their easy runs to get the miles done in a reasonable amount of time. Or they're stressed and they don't have a lot of time, so they try to crank as much as they can in. Well, now all of a sudden you're not getting the purpose out of the run, the easy run. Was it you were supposed to recover or you're supposed to get aerobic adaptations? You didn't do it. You just pushed to get the 10 miles in because that's all you had the time for. Versus a 60-minute run is a 60-minute run, whether you run fast or slow. And so when I see athletes doing this who are supposed to be running easy, but they start creeping into marathon pace, tempo pace, they don't want to be out there, for as long. And this is a problem because now it's not easy. You're not recovering. You're not accumulating the appropriate fatigue, and you're not getting the aerobic adaptations you should be getting because you're running too hard. And so mileage-based training can also create this obsessive relationship with hitting certain numbers. Like, I need to get in 50 miles this week. Oh, I just got to go out and squeeze out an extra 3 miles, even though I'm tired and my knee's a little janky. It's not smart training. It's just chasing a number for the sake of a number. Whereas on the time side, I feel like the advantage is that you get this effort over outcome. When you set out to run, say, 60 minutes, the only goal is to be out there for 60 minutes. If you're tired or it's hot or you're on hills and you run slower, that's fine. You're still going to hit your 60 minutes. And I find for a lot of athletes that, have come to me that were mileage-based and I've converted over time-based, it removes a lot of that pressure. They can truly run their easy days easy because there's no distance target hanging over their head. From a psychological perspective, that time-based training also feels a lot more manageable. So saying I'm going to go run for 45 minutes feels less daunting than I'm going to go run for 6 miles. Even if they're equivalent, it's a finite chunk of time and you can handle almost anything for 45 minutes versus you just go push out a certain amount of mileage. I've had athletes switch over and immediately they've told me they feel less stressed about their runs, they stop obsessing over their pace, they stop pushing when they shouldn't, their workouts get better, and they start to enjoy the process a lot more. Beyond the psychology, let's talk about the physiology and see what's actually happening with your body. So on the time-based approach, we can look at it as time and metabolic stress. When you track by time, you're more directly tracking metabolic stress. Your body doesn't care how far you went, it cares how long you were working and at what intensity. And so a 90-minute run, as an example, creates a certain metabolic demand: glycogen depletion, fat oxidation, aerobic enzyme activation, regardless of whether you've cut 10 miles or 12 miles, doesn't matter. And so this is actually more in line with how exercise physiology works. You might remember as a kid, we talked about the alactic and the aerobic and the anaerobic systems, and there's time-based to it, right? It's not exactly true, but just as an analogy that you might recognize. And so when we study training adaptations in the lab, we prescribe workouts by time and intensity, not by distance. So to just give you an example, if you think about it this way, if you put someone on a treadmill and you want to create a specific metabolic stimulus, you would go and you would set the time and the intensity. You don't say run until you've covered 5 miles. There's nothing standardized about that. You say run for 30 minutes at this heart rate or in this zone. And so the question everybody seems to want to answer is, well, which one creates the better adaptations? And as I kind of note off the top, they both work in theory. Your body adapts to stress, whether that stress comes from covering distance or spending time on your feet. Your body is still going to adapt to stress. But I would make a very strong argument that time-based training is slightly more adaptable because it accounts for context. And I think we're seeing this in the trail world as that's starting to take over, and we're starting to pull things from trail over to traditional road racing and marathoning. And so if you're tired or it's hot or you're on trails, time-based training is probably going to moderate your intensity. You'll slow down, but you'll still complete the workout. Mileage-based training doesn't have that built-in safety valve. You can push too hard trying to hit your miles and really dig yourself into a hole. So when to use each approach? Use time-based training when you are building a base or doing your easy runs. This is where time-based training really shines, I think. Easy runs should be about your time on feet, not hitting a certain distance. If you're supposed to be doing easy 6 minutes, doesn't matter if it's 6 miles or 8 miles. Just be out there for 60 minutes. Secondly, if you're running in variable conditions, heat, altitude, trails, hills, anytime conditions are going to slow you down, time-based training is better. You get the training effect without the pressure to hit certain paces or distances. Third, if you're recovering from an injury or building back up, time-based training takes the pressure off. You can ease back into things. It also allows us to standardize your return to run protocol. The fourth one, and this is the most common one that I see, is you're prone to overtraining or obsessing over numbers. If you're the type of person who will push through fatigue just to hit that weekly mileage goal, time-based training can help moderate your intensity and stay healthy. This will be a bit of a controversial take, but I actually prefer to do the long runs in marathon training as time-based, especially for recreational marathoners. A 2-hour long run is a 2-hour long run. I don't care if you cover 12 12 miles or 15 miles. The stimulus we want for marathoning is time on feet. Whereas I would use mileage-based training when you're doing specific workouts. So, if you're on a track, it's a little bit easier. Yasso 800s, I'm not really a fan of them, but that's an example that most people have heard. You run 800 meters hard, 800 meters easy. I think that's a great use case for them. Track workouts or, for 5K, 10K and track events, I think there's a great use case when you're using the track to be training by distance. I think the other use case is if you're an experienced runner with good pacing instincts. So if you know how to run easy and don't push too hard, you can use this. All in though, I've got a bit of a hybrid approach with most of my athletes. And so easy runs and long runs are primarily prescribed by time. Some of the workouts and specific, pace runs are prescribed by distance. And so weekly volume is tracked in both time and mileage on Final Surge. So I see both, but I'm not overly obsessive about what their weekly mileage was. This gives us a lot of flexibility, I find, to use the time-based training for the bulk of the work, but some of the precision of mileage-based training for some of the very specific work that we're looking to do. If you're not sure where your current fitness sits or what volume you can actually handle, I've put together a free marathon readiness assessment. The link is in the description. That'll help you figure out exactly where you are, what gaps you need to close, and whether you should be building that time or mileage or both based on your specific situation. So let's talk a little bit about how to structure your training block. So the first piece I would look at from my framework would be define your goal. What are you training for? That goal determines how you structure your training. For longer races, such as half marathons, volume matters more, your total training. So you need to build your aerobic engine and your endurance, your total time on feet. Second thing I would say, what is your volume ceiling? What have you done in the past? Do you have volume levels where you get injured? What does that look like? So we can start trying to build out a ceiling for you and or figure out the reasons why you haven't been able to go past that before. This third step would be build gradually. Take your time. Most people have a calendar problem. They want everything right now, but if we elongate the calendar, we will get there more safely and have a higher likelihood of actually getting the thing you want. Step 5, adjust for context. If you've got, only access to track for your workouts, let's use mileage, right? If you can go off-road, we'll use time. The next framework would be periodize your volume. We don't just run the same volume week after week after week after week. We might build for a couple of weeks. We might take a down week. We might build for an entire build. We might run different volume to intensity ratios throughout the year. How you periodize your training will help you dictate how good you get. And finally, listen to your body and adjust. This is one that I hate when runners don't do this. If you're constantly tired, your pace is dropping, you're getting injured, you're not enjoying the sport anymore, you're doing too much. Pull back. Pull back on the total time that you're training or the total volume. Training is dynamic. I always tell my athletes, the plan is only as good as the information I have when I read it. Be dynamic. If you need an audible, call an audible. Adjust based on how you're responding. That's the key. Time and mileage are both valid ways to structure training, but they create different psychological and physiological pressures. Use time-based training for easy runs, long runs, especially if you're prone to pushing too hard or unsure about the variable training conditions. It's more forgiving and more adaptable. Use mileage-based training for workouts and specific runs where precision matters. Track both time and weekly mileage over weeks so you can spot trends and make informed adjustments. Don't obsess over hitting certain numbers every week. Look at the big picture. Adjust for training conditions and fatigue. Don't just blindly follow the plan. Volume is important, but it's not everything. Everything matters in the entire recipe as we put it together. And finally, be consistent over weeks and months. 1 week isn't going to determine your marathon success, but months and months and months and months will. Hopefully that clears up the time versus mileage debate. I'd love to hear what you think. Engaging with you guys in the comments is the best part about doing this YouTube stuff. It forces me to think when I try to put this together and articulate my arguments. But when I get to talk to you guys and hear what you say and what you're training for and the questions you have, that actually makes this worthwhile. So take a look at some of the free tools. And if you've liked this video, please check out some of my other ones. And I'd love if you would subscribe as well so more runners like you can find the channel.